I wrote the book because there really wasn't any other history book written on African American education in the state of Delaware. I started the work when I received a grant through the Delaware State Historic Preservation Office to write a fully developed historic context for African American education statewide from 1770 through 1940. There was an overall neglect when it came to educating African Americans, not just in Delaware, but throughout the country. They still pursued education, they still struggled, and with very limited resources managed to create an outstanding educational system for African American children in Delaware. The challenges to African American education in Delaware have been from essentially the very beginning. Many saw educating African Americans as a threat to the societal order at the time, where white men were at the top of the power structure of the country, and it gradated to African Americans and African Americans enslaved. And Delaware was a slave state, even though over the years there were strong abolitionist movements to abolish slavery in the state. And by the time of the American Civil War, only 3% of the African American population was enslaved. Still, there was a struggle within the state whether to educate African Americans, in particular freedmen, between many of the religious organizations. For example, the Quakers, from almost the beginning, provided some sort of educational opportunity for African Americans, and the others, especially some of the agribusiness groups in the state, farmers, who relied upon African Americans as farm workers, saw no need to provide an education for African Americans. They essentially a strong back and a weak mind was how they viewed educating African Americans. They wanted them in the fields. Following the American Civil War, in 1866, there, however, was a growing movement to establish an educational system for African Americans in the state. And I believe much of that grew from the Freedmen's Bureau, and during the Civil War, the Port Royal experiment in South Carolina on the Sea Islands, where abolitionists from New York and Delaware, John Hunn, for example, went to South Carolina and they experimented with redistribution of abandoned plantations and educating the freedmen. And from that grew what became known as the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau paid particular interest in providing educational opportunities to the newly freed African Americans. Delaware saw this as something that they wanted to follow, especially the religious leaders of the state wanted to provide educational opportunities for African Americans in the state. And in 1866, a group of religious leaders invited a group from Baltimore to come over and explain how they were establishing educational opportunities for African Americans in Baltimore. They met in Wilmington, and from that meeting grew the Delaware Association for the Moral Improvement and Education of the Colored People. This was modeled after the Baltimore Association for the Moral Improvement and Education of Colored People. Delaware removed the moral improvement, seeing the obvious problems with that, and shortened it to the Delaware Association for the Education of Colored People. And that even became shortened to the Delaware Association. From this organization grew a movement to establish educational opportunities for African Americans throughout the state. They secured support from a variety of organizations and private interest businesses, from the Delaware Railroad that provided transportation of surplus hospitals that were provided by the Freedmen's Bureau. And so the Delaware Railroad transported those materials to various locations throughout the state where local volunteers would pick up the materials and deliver them to sites. And typically those sites were next to churches, black churches in the state, whether they were African Methodist Episcopal churches or Methodist Episcopal churches. Typically, the land that the schoolhouses were built upon was provided by the churches. And so throughout the state, you could go to the local African American church, and next door was the schoolhouse. So they were closely related. In looking at the deeds and so forth, I quite often found that the church trustees were often the school trustees, and typically the church would sell the school the land for $1 or just simply donate that land to the school, the Delaware Association school. And when the schools first opened, typically the minister of the church would also be the school teacher. And this was a long tradition within the state, even before the Civil War. Quite often, the church provided the education for the children in the form of Sunday school. As a matter of fact, quite often, the first public school systems or movements were called Sunday school movement. And almost from the very beginning in the late 19th century, Delaware saw the need for a professional teacher, a school teacher trained at what were called normal schools, teacher preparation schools. Then eventually the state saw the need to prepare and train Delawareans to teach in the schools. And when Delaware State College, what was called State College for Colored Students of the state of Delaware, was established in 1891, one of the first programs that what now is called Delaware State University added was a normal school to prepare teachers who would go out into the local schools to teach. And so initially these were some of the challenges. And one very important challenge to the African American community in Delaware was providing the funds to support the schools. Keeping in mind that the Delaware Association was a private organization that relied upon contributions to support the schools. And quickly, the African American community saw that they could support their schools if they could direct their taxes, property taxes, to supporting the African American schools rather than their property taxes supporting the white schools. And essentially this is the public school system in Delaware, much like it's supported today, was supported through real estate taxes. And African Americans paid real estate taxes, but those taxes went to support the white schools rather than the African American schools, which were supported by private charitable organization. And in 1874, a group of African Americans met here in Dover at the White Coat Methodist Episcopal Church on Slaughter Street, which is now a Baptist church, and held a convention. And that convention came out with some demands. One demand was for Delaware to support the pending Civil Rights Bill in Congress, which later became the 1875 Civil Rights Act, and also demanded that the legislature pass a law that would allow African Americans to keep their taxes to support their schools. And eventually the state of Delaware did pass legislation in the 1880s that provided public support for the African American schools. Now, with that said, the next challenge was get the tax collector to actually collect the taxes. And for a variety of reasons, many of the county tax collectors would not collect taxes on African American property. One reason why they didn't collect taxes, and then eventually inform the property owner that you may lose your property to sheriff's auction, was to keep them from voting, poll taxes. And if you didn't own property, you were required to pay a poll tax to vote. And if you owned property, that meant that you were a property owner and could vote. But if you weren't paying your taxes, you couldn't vote. So this was a way to disfranchise African American voters in the state. The other was to, the taxes, of course, supported the local education system. And with opposition to educating African Americans anyway, not collecting the taxes would mean that they would possibly not be able to conduct school in the local area. One incident occurred in the 1880s in Odessa, which is not far from Dover. It's a little community to the north of Dover. A group of African American men came together, and because they were having a difficult time finding the Newcastle County tax collector to pay their taxes for their property. And they knew if they didn't pay their taxes what that would mean. They could lose their right to vote, they could lose their property, and above all else, they couldn't support their schools for their children. So the group got together, and they tracked down where the tax collector was. He'd actually left the state and gone to Philadelphia for business. So they found out where he was staying. They traveled to Philadelphia to his hotel. They knocked the door down and entered the door, and by gunpoint forced the tax collector to collect their taxes. That's how important education was to African Americans in the late 19th century, and continues to be so.